the reason we wanted to document it. What they were doing was, in fact, so incredible that we just really thought it should be filmed.
Running, actually, when I got sober, running saved my life. And then running actually gave me a life.
Welcome back to the Cannonball Mindset. I never considered myself a runner, but when I started running, I started following runners, and I came across a Running Digest article of this guy and immediately became fascinated with the entire story. I went on to read his book, The Running Man, which is phenomenal. I reached out to him. This is how great this guy is. I reached out to him through social media. He's got, a kajillion followers. Send him a message, say, hey, I'm really fascinated. We start the conversation back and forth. I asked him to be a guest on my podcast, and lo and behold, he comes to Maryland, and here we are. And I want to introduce Charlie Engle, one of the greatest runners of all. I don't even know if is that how you people introduce like one of the greatest runners of all time? Are they like one of the greatest survivors, gladiators? Like, what is the terminology?
Well, it's certainly how I introduce myself. No, totally kidding.
I'm the gladiator. Well, I'm sitting here with Charlie Engle, who we're going to learn a lot about over the next couple hours, but one of the only men alive to run across the Sahara Desert. Is that correct?
Yeah. Who knew Africa was that big?
Oh my gosh! Like up in my mind, I had to go way back to school to think about the size of Sahara Desert, and I never actually looked at it on a map until after I read your book. So when in your book you're talking about, well, we got to run across Libya, or we might have to run across Chad, or we might have to, we're going to run to the, and I'm thinking, well, how the hell big is this Sahara Desert? So I Google it, right? I Google it, and I'm like, holy mama jama, that's big. It's big. And sitting here with Charlie Engle. Charlie, introduce yourself. Again, people that, I'm sure everybody knows who you are, but let's talk about who you are.
Yeah, thanks, Chad, for having me. I'm excited to be here and glad that it worked out. Baltimore is a cool place, so.
Yeah.
It's I don't describe myself as I do describe myself as a runner, and you, by the way, are also a runner, whether you believe it or not. It is kind of like art. You are a runner if you say you're a runner. And you have to feel you're a runner, and too often runners base their, whether or not they think they're a runner on, how fast they can run a 5K or a marathon or something like that. And it is a, running is a state of mind as much as anything else. So I think what I'm known for is running across some big places, sharing my struggle. You and I were talking before all this. I think one of the things that I'm good at is doing hard things, but then making them look as hard as they really are, maybe even harder.
Right.
And I think that's everybody can relate to struggle. And so I think that this idea that something that's incredibly difficult can be done easily is not worth. It's just not worth it, So people want to envision the struggle with you. So I hope through all my years of running and my other adventures that what I've done is taken people with me along on the struggle.
Yeah, well, such a great description. I'm saying because to know you, and today was the first time we met face to face, but we've spoken. I feel like I know you really well, and what's amazing to me is I think about your. We'll talk about your run across the United States, or we'll talk about the run across the Sahara Desert and all these amazing things, these ultra marathons you've done. But those aren't the biggest battles you've won. Like it's crazy to me if you think about, to run what you've done, to physically do what you've done in the running arena, running space, is not even close to the biggest challenge you've overcome in your life, or the biggest physical or mental challenge you've overcome in your life.
Man, you said it incredibly well right there. And it is funny. I do always like to say about my running, it's not false modesty to say that I'm an average. I'm above average runner, but what I really am when it comes to the running is stubborn as hell, or as my wife would say, too stupid to quit. And and so that's a particular part of my personality. But that was in reference to what you just said. That is born in my addictive nature. I am an addict through and through. I'm a drug addict. I'm an alcoholic. I am if you can do it in moderation, I have absolutely no interest in it, apparently.
Right.
And so, my life has been my sober life. I got sober. I'm 55 now, and I got sober when I was 29, and so these last 26 years have been spent learning, seeking moderation to a certain degree, but also understanding that all of the greatest lessons I ever learned were actually during my 12 years of really hardcore addiction. Because I learned how to survive, and I learned that everything I take on with running is voluntary. Nobody forced me to run across the Sahara Desert or across America. There wasn't. That was me wanting to test myself, and those were voluntary. Addiction was not voluntary. No one would choose to be a drug addict because it is genuinely a living hell.
Right.
So, yet if I could take a pill right now, which is a funny way to say it, and all of a sudden not be an addict anymore, and not have that part, I would never in a million years do it.
Yeah.
I'm fully tied into that being, part of my own personal journey.
Yeah. You can't take a chapter out of your book and expect to have the same book. Right? I'm saying the reality
Nobody'd
is
read it.
Nobody,
First of all.
that's it. Right? Nobody'd read it. But what it is it's that, I think Tony Robbins said it when he said it's a perspective of this is happening to me or this is happening for me. It's all about perspective, right?
Yeah.
And I want to go back and I want to start because there's so much to get into here. There's so much to talk about on so many different levels. But I want to start. I want to go back to when you were young. You grew up in North Carolina.
I did.
And I have this image from the book, and there's you can talk about it, but there's you and the train, and this moment, and I don't know if you meant to describe this in your book so vividly, but captivated me. This moment about you and the train, because that's when it really started, like this idea of running towards something. I'm not talking about the physical nature to run, but everything seemed to start changing at that moment. Is that
it's an incredible. I love that you chose that scene, because what it was about was, for the listeners out there, is I'm 12 years old. My mother has moved me to Attica, New York. And Attica is famous for having one thing, and that's a prison. Right. And everybody knows it because of the prison riots that had taken place just a couple of years before we got there. Yeah. And my mom was a writer and an acting coach, and so she literally took a writing and acting program into Attica Prison and Elmira State Prison and Sing Sing, all up in New York. So I'm up there with her, just she and I, and she's gone sometimes for. I had a very bohemian, upbringing. My mom was so incredibly. I jokingly say that she was. I was lovingly neglected as I was growing up, because my mom really I was her world, but she had her own life, and I was left to sort of raise myself. So the story of the train comes about because she's gone. She's gone one day. She's at the prison. She's working. I'm home. This is on a weekend actually, and I'd been watching this train that runs right behind our apartment building up there in New York, and I'd watched it, and some of the people that I was hanging out with that was destined for trouble, we would hang out there by the train tracks, and just one day I decided, I'm gonna get on that train. I'm just gonna see if I can catch the train. And I run along, and as I describe in the book, and I time my jump and barely manage to grab the handle, and I'm dragging along, and I pull myself up into this boxcar, and the whole point was lost on me at the moment, and the fact that I had I just knew I wanted to be on it, and I wanted to see where it was going.
Yeah.
And of course, like so many things in life that we actually catch and get into, 5 minutes later, I realized I was surrounded by, you know, a boxcar that smelled like piss, and I didn't have any way to get off of it.
Right. Right.
And so then the problem became, you know, how do I get back home?
Correct. Yeah. Well, and that's what part really captivates me, because so often we aspire to get onto something, but we get onto something that's moving so fast, and we haven't planned for how the hell do we get off.
No.
And we end up just staying on it. I read through your whole book. I've read everything about you, and I keep going back to that scene, because you talked about it a little bit, where you're hanging around people that were destined for that started, you know, when you're in North Carolina. You know, the book starts when you're in Carolina when you're a kid.
Yeah.
It doesn't talk about you hanging around the wrong crowd or whatever. It talks about that moment of shift, that change in New York. You jump on the train, but now the hell you don't know how to get off, and it seems like that seems to be a trend for the next couple of years, for several years in your life, right? You're moving at a high rate of speed, no clue where the hell you're going.
No, it's a metaphor for sure, and I may still be doing it today. You know, very often. I mean, the excitement of actually getting on the train, right, is part of what life is about.
Correct.
You desperately want to get on it, even if you have no idea really where it's going or how you're gonna control the motion or where it stops. And eventually, with the train itself, I realized, you know, 5 or 6 miles into this journey on this train at 12 years old, that this thing didn't seem to be stopping anytime soon, and I needed to get the hell off of it.
I need to get back home.
Yeah, and so I did. I got up. It was my first long distance run. I managed to lower myself to the ground, and I dragged my feet, you know, on the side of the tracks. You know, the train obviously wasn't going super fast, but and I knew if I let go and I fell, I was going to be hurt. And I managed to let go, and I always equate it to like a Roadrunner cartoon. You know, I managed to get my feet going fast enough to not fall and do a face plant. Yeah. You know, and then I watched the train speed away, and I stepped into the middle of the tracks, and I turned around and I ran all the way back home.
And your mom was never
told her.
No.
She's like, "How was your day?" When she got home, I'm like, fine.
It was all right. Inside, you know, I jumped on a train, I jumped off a train, I ran 6 miles, and so it begins.
What's crazy is she wouldn't have judged me for it, though. I mean, my mom was the kind of person that, you know, she would have maybe been a little concerned, but I mean, I wasn't even hiding it as much as it was really just my first personal, like, journey, just to do something, A, to see if I could do it, and B, to just, I don't know, I kept the feelings to myself, and it was like my own little
adventure,
private thing, adventure, and it did set a lot of things in motion for me.
You talked about your mom, and obviously your mom passed away a year ago.
Yeah.
So I'm really sorry to hear
Thank
that,
you.
and send my condolences. But the raised by a really strong, powerful woman. You know, I raised by a single mother. I think that again, strong, powerful women rule the world. It's no secret in my life that I believe this. But your mom she didn't go to Attica because it was a place she could get a job that she could teach theater. She was a true activist in every
My
sense
mom
of the
wanted
word,
to
right?
save the world, man. She wanted to save the world, and she was willing to do it one person at a time. And the beauty of what it taught me, even all the way back then as a kid, is because I went to the prison with her a lot of times, and there were times where, you know, it's New York, man. We got snowed in. We'd actually be at the prison for a couple of days at a time. And I got to be around, I think rules have probably changed a lot. But I mean, I got to be around, you know, these people who had been convicted of really serious crimes. And you know what I found out? They were just pretty average, normal people who most of them in the heat of the moment, either in a drug haze or through some series of bad emotional decisions, you know, they just made really bad choices, and they took somebody's life, or they, you know, got a gun and robbed a bank or did whatever. And, you know, and it was my first exposure to kind of the criminal justice system. And what I found out more than anything is these were just people.
Just people.
You know, with really just minor degrees of difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, between the rest of us.
Yeah. One of my favorite things, I forget who said it, one of the favorite things I've ever heard, and it resonates with me so much in my mind over and over, is you're never as bad as the worst thing you ever done. And it's so easy to judge people on hey, you did this horrible, heinous thing, and you did this, and listen, I know two things for sure. I know there's a judge, and I know I'm not it. Right?
Well, we judge people too on what they got caught doing, right? And very few of us have the introspection to lay what other people have done. And and again, I'm not talking about murder or whatever, but we all carry a certain amount of baggage and shame over decisions we've made. But the vast majority of us probably didn't get caught doing the worst thing that we ever did.
Correct.
And so so we don't we don't suffer the judgment of what either the law or humanity has to say about us, because it's personal and private. And we'll probably talk more about the criminal justice system a little bit later, but right. My mom helped me humanize the world, and to understand that I grew up in the 60s and 70s in rural North Carolina, so there was a lot of racial tension. There was a lot of I was in the time of forced busing, and I learned to navigate that world, pretty well early on. And I understood without having to be told by my mother. She was the first one to it's about action, not self-promotion. She didn't have to tell me to be nice to black people.
Yeah, right.
Right? I mean, by her actions, she genuinely treated every single person she met the same, as far as I could tell, as a kid.
Yeah.
So what I learned was I should treat every single person I meet the same, based on their own individual merits.
Correct. Yeah.
Not anything, literally not anything else. It's not more complicated than that.
It's very simple. That mindset is very simple. You will do what you see. You will become what you find, what you focus on, and that, to me, and that resonates throughout your whole book. This is what's amazing. So I want to move to you are a young teenager, I believe. You have your first sip of alcohol, right, at a party. Is that, or not after a party?
Yeah, it was actually
an adult party. Is that right?
That very first one was actually in my mom's house.
Right, yeah.
After a play. She was a playwright, and so and everybody's passed out and laying out, and my mom and my stepdad and other people are actually dancing in the front yard to some Janis Joplin song, which I don't know how you can dance to that, but
no, neither do I.
No, but and I literally am. It wasn't a great environment in the sense that my fridge certainly wasn't stocked with good things to eat and drink at that point, and so I walked around, and I finished off 2 or 3 beers that were just sitting on the table, and it was at that moment, I was like 8 years old, and it was at that moment that I think I say in the book that alcohol planted a flag in my brain and claimed it for its own.
Yeah, amazing. So you end up going to school, high school, becoming all-state, all-world basketball player, right, in Carolina.
Yeah, I was an overachiever, man. I figured if I couldn't get attention for, anything else, I would just, try to be the best at everything, which I now know, looking back, is kind of the manifestation of that addictive nature that I had. Like, if I was going to do it, I was going to do it.
I'm going to go all in.
Absolutely.
So talk about your time in your senior year of high school. You're being drafted. You're being prospected. You're being prospected by schools for different sports.
Football, basketball. Yeah, I played a lot of sports, and I was like, I was that guy in high school. I was student body president and made good grades and dated cheerleaders, and I had that, and I'm happy to say, and I think I've confirmed it after all these years and still being friends with old high school classmates, that I'm told that I was a nice and decent guy too,
Right,
you know.
right.
So I wasn't.
You weren't the jackass.
No, I
yeah.
wasn't the jackass version of that. I'm sure I was a jackass sometimes, but it's just inevitable. But
Yeah.
you know, and so I got accepted at UNC Chapel Hill, and I go to school as a 17-year-old freshman, and this is where life changed, because I got there and, you know, I literally expected. I'm not. I mean, I am kidding, but that there would be a banner like on my dorm when I got there that said like "Welcome, Charlie."
Welcome, Charlie.
Like this
Engel.
big, you
Yeah,
know.
right.
Oh my God, we can get on with our lives now that you're here.
Yeah.
And you know, and of course, that didn't happen. Just and what I figured out after, like, you know, it didn't take long. A week into it, it's like I'm there with 4,000 other freshmen who have the exact same resume I do.
Yeah.
They were all the good athlete, the you know, good student, good all of these things.
It's Chapel Hill.
Yeah, and better at most things than I was.
Yeah.
And back then, the drinking age. So in September of that year, I turned 18,
Yeah.
and the drinking age. Not that really mattered for my drinking, but. And the drinking age was 18 in North Carolina still at that time for beer and wine.
Yeah.
And
So you're a college freshman, legally able to drink.
Hey, I can go down to Franklin Street in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and go to any bar and get absolutely wasted if I want to, and it's completely within all the rules.
It's legal.
And what I figured out really, really quickly is that I was like first team All-American superstar drinker.
Right.
Like I just could drink more than anybody else around me. And not that, you know, I of course now recognize that that's not exactly the reputation that you want.
Right.
But for a while it was fun, you know, and that's the way addiction kind of starts. You know, there's a period of time where it actually works for a person.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's for notoriety or just escape, or I mean, at that point, I just knew I felt like an imposter on that campus. I felt like everybody was smarter than I was and knew things that I just didn't know. And I was that guy in high school who, a lot of people are this way. I didn't have to study that hard. I was smart enough in high school to make good grades without really working very hard.
Yeah.
And guess what? That doesn't work in college.
That shit don't work in college.
No.
Anymore, right? So, but you're there. I'm saying you're there in 1982, 84.
We're going to talk some basketball now. So
Right.
I got
That's
there in
right,
1980.
1980.
Yeah.
Right. So you're there with Dean Smith.
Yeah.
You're there with Michael Jordan.
And he knows who I am.
Dean Smith, right?
Yeah,
He knows you
yeah.
are. Michael Jordan, James Worthy. I'm saying you're
Sam Perkins.
You're
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
to play sports
Yeah.
with what goes on to be some of the greatest basketball. Well,
Yeah.
Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player of all time. You know, Dean Smith, the greatest college coach of all time, with the exception of maybe James Wooden.
Yeah.
But, you know, so you're there, and to do that, but you're focused on the partying.
Look, I keep it together for a while, all right?
Yeah.
Because that is the nature of drinking like this, you know, and of being 18 years old. I could go out and get wasted, get up the next day, go to class, still do just okay,
Yeah.
make it to practice. And to be clear for the audience, let's get one thing straight. So my old man played for Dean Smith in his first couple of years of coaching back in the early 60s. And my grandfather had been the track coach at Carolina for like 40 years, and he died when I was young, though, so I didn't really know him. But I had this legacy, this expectation at Carolina to be successful. And I went there, ironically, to actually play football, or I thought I was going to play football. No scholarship offer, but an invitation to walk on, and I was a decent high school football player, and I got hurt like the second week of my freshman year and never set foot on a football field, but decided to go out for JV basketball, which at Carolina is a thing.
Yeah, of
You know,
course. JV
and-
basketball in Carolina is probably like like varsity
Yeah.
basketball at any other school in
We
the country.
played a lot of Division III schools. I mean, we had 4 guys that were 6'9" or over, you know, on this JV team. So we did have, you know, some really excellent players. But the best perk and benefit was that we got to practice, with the varsity. We got to be around. We got to sit behind the bench for varsity games. So I got to up close and personal see Michael Jordan as a freshman in '82 and him hit the shot against Georgetown to win the championship, and just to be around all that. And my partying didn't, it hadn't interfered yet. In the very short story, here's what it really cost me, though. Clearly, I was not going to make the varsity team as a player. Like, that was never even like a 1 in a billion chance. That just wasn't going to happen.
But you would play, I'm stereotyping and assuming here, you're playing a shooting guard.
I'm a point guard, shooting guard with a really weak left hand, but I could shoot from the hash marks. I mean, I never met a shot I didn't like.
So you only had Worthy and Jordan in front of you.
Right? Yeah, I was close. I was this close.
I'm saying, imagine trying to play in front of Worthy and Jordan.
But the place that I could have gotten on the varsity team was actually as a manager. So what I did was go to Roy Williams, who was the JV coach at the time. He was the last man on the...
He turned out not to be a bad college
He was
coach.
the fourth coach on the bench at the time, so he was just this young guy. And I went to Roy and I said, or Coach Williams, I shouldn't call him Roy. I went to Coach Williams and I said, I want to move to be a manager. And to do that, I had to take a chunk of humility, and I actually had to be a JV manager for the next year. So I played, and then I became a manager. And the only chance I had of moving to varsity was there were always two varsity scholarship spots as managers on the varsity team. Yeah. And that's where my drinking, that's the first genuine, huge loss that I ever had that could be directly attributed to my behavior. As I started, I missed a couple of practices, my stat sheets, which you had to be very meticulous about doing whatever your assignment was. I was doing sloppy work. And there were 2 or 3 other people that were there with the exact same desire I had, and basically they were kicking my ass. And so I didn't get picked, to move up to varsity, and that was, that was the end of that chapter. And I mean, that was one where I knew for sure, there was no politics, there was no nothing. I did not deserve to move up, and so I didn't.
Unbelievable. So how does it progress? So you're at Carolina, you're at UNC, your drinking starts getting more and more. Does it get more severe? How does this start to steamroll past that?
Well, there's this little thing in the 80s, you may have heard of it, called cocaine. And and so while it's certainly still very much part of our society today, in the 80s it was kind of ubiquitous on college campuses. I mean, it really was it was everywhere. Yeah. And so, again, I go into great detail in the book, but in short, I was offered Coke by somebody, one time, and on a bus heading up to the mountains for a big party. And frankly, I tried it and it did nothing for me. Like I was almost relieved because, drinking, as I say in the book, drinking was something I could rely on. Yeah, I knew how to drink. I knew what it would do to me.
I knew the certainty of it, right?
Right. Even if it ended badly, I knew what I was getting into. And so I sort of brushed it off. And then not long after, I was offered Coke again, and I tried it. And that time, for whatever reason, it literally hit this spot in my brain that, it set in motion this cycle of wanting to match that feeling that lasted 12 years. Because I literally can say that I spent the next 12 years of my life after that night trying to recreate that high. And it's impossible. And I talk to schools a lot these days, and a lot of the speaking I do even at companies, I talk about this idea of all of us basically chasing firsts. Yeah. Like first girlfriend or, first date, first kiss, first job, first car, first all these things. And most of the time we're barely present. We're so excited about it happening.
Yeah.
We're not really paying attention to it. Yeah. But we want to recreate those feelings that we had in that moment, because those are the best feelings in life.
Exactly right.
And I get into it with, we'll talk in a little bit, as we talk more about running, that's why I always say, you always want to keep trying to find something else to try and keep testing yourself, because there's something wonderful about stepping to the line, whether that's a business, a relationship, a run, whatever it might be, to be present and in the moment when you're getting ready to do something for the first time is probably one of the most powerful feelings on the planet.
Oh, no question.
But anyway, I screwed it up completely at that point. Once cocaine got a hold of me, it didn't let go, and it didn't let go for another 10 years at that point.
Yeah.
And you read the book, but I basically spent many years doing what I call geographicals. I flunked out of college by basically just literally my last semester, which was my second semester of my junior year. I quite literally didn't go to a single class that semester, which isn't funny, but I mean, I hadn't told my dad didn't know. He's living 3,000 miles away on the West Coast, and he knows he's getting the bills. But
and then he came and picked you up.
He did. A fraternity brother of mine, which I actually still call this one of the gutsiest things that anybody's ever done for me, not to me. And it's a lesson for people today. I do believe that in general it's better to err on the side of safety. I mean, this friend of mine, he called. First of all, anybody could see if you knew me what was coming. This was a freight train bearing down on me that wasn't going away. I was either going to end up, in jail or dead, or I certainly wasn't going to continue in college. Yeah. So he called my dad and said, "Hey, look, Charlie's in trouble, and I really think you need to come get him." And
it's amazing.
My dad just showed up, and 2 days later, I'm in Seattle.
So what's so interesting in that, we were talking earlier today, that we surround ourselves sometimes with these empathizers, people that really love us, people that really care about us, and they want us to, they really want us to really want to keep us safe, but there's such a stark contrast between empathy and growth. And here's this friend of yours who loved you so much that he became a disruptor and called your father. And you said it's a lesson for a lot of people out there. Sometimes we love the people we love, and we have to be disruptors to them. We have to, because we see what's coming. And it seems like that's what the guy did.
Well, we feel judgmental, right? If we're because this guy who called, he partied too. Yeah. But what he did differently was, he drank Friday and Saturday night, and he might have even done a little drugs here and there, but he got up and went to class on Monday, and right. he was having the college experience, which included actual college,
and included the learning.
And I wasn't. And to use your term a minute ago, there's empathizers, but there's a fine line between that and an enabler is another word for it. Someone who really very often doesn't make that phone call because of the potential pain that it will cause them.
Correct. Right.
Because there's repercussions.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to lose a friend. I'm going to lose. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. But he felt like the things that I was at risk of losing, which namely was my life and certainly, my freedom potentially, because I was dealing coke. I was I wasn't like I didn't even see, to say I didn't realize I was doing something wrong would be disingenuous, but I basically was selling coke to my fraternity brothers, and the only reason I was doing it was so I would have enough to do for myself. Yeah, right. It was purely a self-serving. I wasn't trying to go buy a new, Monte Carlo or a stereo. Yeah. I was trying to just, take care of myself. And and he made that call, and he's, I'm comfortable saying that he saved my life. Yeah. I don't necessarily know that he saved my physical life, although he might have, but it was another step down the road to me finally getting clean and sober, and it still took a lot of years after that.
Yeah. So you're on the West Coast, and you're had met a girl. There's always a girl in the story,
There's
right?
always a girl.
Always a girl. You met a girl, and you come back to the East Coast, correct?
Yeah.
One thing leads to another. You come back to the East Coast. At what point do you hit rock bottom? And we'll get to the running part, but I think it was the rock bottom that started the running, started the change. And at what point do you hit rock bottom? And I know, listen, if you haven't read the book Running Man, buy it today. Literally, buy it today. I think we'll even give some free copies out at the end of this episode. But buy it today, download it, listen to it on Audible, do whatever, because it's literally a book I couldn't put down. And you'll go through it in the book. But what happens at rock bottom that says, I can't do this anymore?
In short, to lead up to that, just very briefly too, I spent years doing what most addicts do, and we call them geographicals. You know, I would move, like I was in Seattle, right? I got a good job. I got a girlfriend. My life was on track. I'm not doing drugs, and that lasted about 6 months. Right. Then I start doing drugs and drinking again. I lose the girlfriend. I lose the job, and I have to move. So every 9 to 12 months for like 5 years, I moved and had a do-over. And every single time that pattern would happen exactly the same way. But of course, it was always somebody else's fault, and it was, everything was not on me. I do finally meet a woman who loves me. Like, this is the first person who I feel like, I'm now like 25 years old, and I feel like she loves me no matter what. Yeah. And not surprisingly, and this all became clear in years later, but she grew up in an alcoholic household. So she grew up with, someone that had the same issues. So she had a certain comfort level with my chaos, with the craziness that came with being with me. Like, she became that person who had to call into my job because I couldn't make it, or she covered for me and she made excuses for me. And while she privately might get on me, I need to make a change. Strangely, she never pressed it that hard. Then she got pregnant. Yeah. Right? So she gets pregnant, and now it's like, holy shit, now there's an actual other human being that's going to be relying on me. Yeah. And I made a determination. I'm like, I am never going to drink or do drugs while he's on this planet, and that's not happening. And for a while, I stuck to that, and he was born in May of 1992, and I stuck with it, and I'm working. I had a crazy business back then. I chased hailstorms for years, which is another story that I won't even go into. But I'm in Wichita, Kansas, like the hail capital of the planet, I think. And I'm on a job, and it has to do with cars. And so I'm working these like 3 or 4 different dealerships and working my butt off. And anyway, my wife and my son come to visit. So he's 2 months old, 2.5 months old. And at this point, I've been sober his whole life. The 2.5 months.
Attending meetings,
going to meetings, and but not. But here's the thing: I had been trying for years actually to stop. This wasn't the first time I tried to stop. And my really not funny joke is, quitting's easy. I've done it 100 times. Right. Because it's like every time I would get wasted. And look, I'm going to say this like for the record, because everybody listening to this right now, it fits in a couple categories. You either are an addict, an addict, you have a family member who's an addict, you know someone who's died of addiction or alcoholism. Right. It just simply, nobody escapes this fully. Correct. We're all touched by it somehow. So we all know who I'm talking about when I'm talking about myself here. So I tried to quit over and over and over and was just unsuccessful. So now all of a sudden there's this baby, and so they come to visit me in Wichita, and I'll never forget, we have this little studio apartment that I got for the week even, just because I wanted it to be nice. And I've got this little tiny baby, and I'm holding this child in my hands, and tears, pouring out of my eyes like all the time. I'm just so happy. Like, this is the life change that I really needed.
Yeah.
And he was going to save me. Like, here is, I'm holding my own savior right here in front of me.
Yeah.
So I drive my wife and my son back to the airport in Wichita after they're there for a week, the best week of my life. I'm full of hope and determination, and I've got this now. I drop them off and I drive straight to the hood, where I spend the next 6 days smoking crack and drinking. And like, it is, if anybody ever needs like confirmation of the inexplicable behavior that goes with addiction, like there's just simply no explanation for what I did. There's no reason why. There's no nothing. I was an addict. Period. So that ended with, your question was, what was the episode? So I'm sitting there on the ground outside a dumpy, $10 a night motel that I can't pay for anymore because I'm broke, watching the police like dig through my car. My car has 3 bullet holes in it. And these were put there by someone who was shooting at me. Like, they weren't shooting at my car.
Right.
Like, they were trying to kill me if they could. And the policeman like reaches under the driver's seat and he pulls out this glass pipe, this small pipe, and he literally, slow motion, I still see it in my head like it's happening this second. He turns very slowly and looks at me holding this pipe, and he's shaking his head. And I can just feel that judgment, that pain of that moment. And I feel like such a piece of garbage. And any sane person would have been looking at him going, oh my God, I am in some serious trouble now. Like, this just got real. Yeah. All I could think about was, so that's where that was. I wonder if there's anything left in there.
Wow.
Like, that's what's going through my mind. And that kind of sick thinking, I knew in that moment I had a choice. I could either live or I could die. And so that night I went to an AA meeting, and the next morning I put on my running shoes and I went for a run. And for the next 3 years, I did that same routine every single day without missing a day.
3 years.
A meeting and a run every day. And slowly but surely, I began to build a life for myself.
Wow. To me, listen, I've read it. I know your story. But hearing you say it makes it exemplify. Like, it makes it so much more powerful to me. Like, just being part of that moment that you just described was so. I have a lot of gratitude just for that moment that you just shared with us and me personally. So now you start running, and you go from one addiction, right, that's gonna kill you, to another addiction of running.
That might kill me.
That might, right, very well. Some of the races you've done, but tell me, how do you now begin this lifelong running? I'm going to fast forward. I'll save this. Fast forward. A couple weeks ago, you celebrated 26 years of sobriety, and you celebrated by running 26 straight hours.
Right? I did.
So, which is, I followed it. It was amazing. I don't even know if there's another word to describe it. But let's rewind back. Now that I've told people the end of the story, that part of the end of the story. How do you decide, hey, this is what I'm going to do? This is going to be my relief.
So during those 3 years when I really started running, and again, to flash back very briefly to the book before I got sober, if you remember, I ran the Big Sur Marathon. Basically, I wasn't sober. Like, I literally showed up at this race and did it after quitting drinking like 2 hours before, and I survived it and whatever else.
Throwing up along the route.
Terrible. Yeah. And that was where I like literally I watched people at the finish. You and I talked about this earlier, getting the medal, right? They're getting their medal at the end, and I see they're crying and they're like so happy and hugging family. And I finished my race, of course, and I feel nothing. I'm empty because I'm just this shell of a person, and totally broken, and I'm just empty, man. I'm just empty. And so when I finally made the decision for the first time, and I said it a minute ago, but when the realization hit me that my son wasn't going to save me. You know, before then, I thought the job would stop me, my wife would stop me, whatever. It took all of that happening to understand that there was only one person that was going to save me, and that was me.
That's me.
And if I didn't make a decision to do it for myself, if I had any ulterior motive other than purely staying alive and actually getting to a point where I could live a reasonable, functional, hopefully meaningful life, that was only going to happen because I made the choice to do that, and nobody else could do that for me. So I started running marathons though, and in those first 3 years I ran like a maniac. I ran like 30 marathons, and I would say, because clearly I had that whole addiction thing under control, right?
Right. I'm just going to become addicted to marathons.
But you know what I thought I needed to do, and this is early sobriety, and I'm in a lot of pain, and I wanted to if I could have taken a scalpel and cut the addict out of me, like if I could have located that piece of me and like cut it out, I would have done it. What it took was those 3 years of that kind of crazy running where every time I went out the door, I ran as hard as humanly possible for me every single time. Like I wanted to suffer. I wanted that pain because I wanted this all to go away. And it took me those years to figure out that actually the addict part of me is all the best parts of me. Like if I didn't have the addict, I wouldn't be good at anything. Like, so it's about figuring out a way to take the things, the gifts that I do have, and use them to my benefit, which really is talking to you. It's what you do. It's what we all strive to do. Is instead of trying to take our flaws and our gifts and all of that and eliminate some and get rid of it. It's about finding a way to use all those things to help us get where we want to go. Or first of all, to determine where the hell we want to go.
Yeah. Wow.
And then get on to using them to our benefit. So
wow.
Ultimately, there was I ended up after those 3 years and a couple of other crazy races, this race I did in Australia that I describe in the book where I accidentally entered an ultra because I just wasn't very bright.
Yeah, please. I don't know if that to me. What's crazy about that, right? Again, I don't want to ruin the book for everybody, but what's crazy about that is, you're in this race that you don't realize is a 50. You think it's a 5,
right?
But you're saying I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop.
Dude, I tried to quit that race like 5 times.
Right, that's it. But there's somebody there, right? Oh, I'm gonna stop. And it was a much smaller scale, but I was on my first 20-mile run. This was 2 years ago, and I was training first 20-mile run, and I was probably 10 or 11 miles in, and I'm exhausted, and I'm on a trail, but I'm afraid to stop because of my ego, because people keep coming. And I don't want people to see me walking. I was afraid that somebody I knew would see me walking and be like, Chad's not a runner. He's a speed walker. He walks fast, right? So all this shit's going on in my head. So I'm like, all right, around this turn, I'm going to walk because there won't be anybody there. And I'll walk until I see somebody in the distance, and then I'll start running again because my ego doesn't want people to see me walking. And damn sure if for the next 6 miles, every time I want to stop, here comes another person. I was so pissed. I was like, would people please stop coming down the trail? I want to stop. This is my mind. This is how screwed up my ego was. But
I tried to quit my race, and I mean, I quit. I didn't try to quit. Like, I quit. I was done. And I'll never forget it, this super cute little girl who had been at the registration table. And first of all, it's not like she was ever going to be interested in me. It doesn't take actual genuine interest. I was just some friggin', I was probably 20 years older than she was or whatever. Anyway, but I'm done. Like, I know that I'm finished and I'm hovering. It's a loop course though, right? And she comes up to me, she said, "You're going to keep going, aren't you?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." It's like all it took was that question from one person.
Yeah, that's it. My ego says, now I can't quit, right? That's so funny.
But that race changed everything for me because after that one, yes, it was like an accidental Ultra. And
accidental 50-mile run.
Correct. I mean, after that one, I wanted, then this thing kicked into me that said, because look, man, by that time I'd run a lot of marathons, and I thought I would be that old guy, and I was totally fine with this image. I'd be that old guy you see kind of crooked, running down the road at like 78 years old, and he's doing his 490th marathon. And like that was going to be my life, and I was cool with that because to me that actually looked great. That seemed like a really good life. But after that run, this thing kicked in that said I want to see just how far I can go, and I began to seek races of 50 miles and 100 miles, and then I did races of hundreds of miles across the Amazon and across the jungles in Vietnam and Borneo, and I ran across the Gobi Desert and the Atacama Desert in Chile, and and all these things just kept leading me down this path of geographical discovery. I mean, one of the things that I always say I am is I'm a cultural explorer, which is a fancy way of saying I like people. So I'm more interested in going to places and interacting. And I'm not a tour bus guy. So I don't want to be in a car or something like that to meet people. I want to be on foot or on a bike or something that's relatable to them. And I don't want to just go to fancy European cities, which I do love, going to those places. I'd rather be in rural Africa or South America, seeing people who are just as curious about me as I am about them.
Yeah, right.
And that's the beauty of what I've done all these years. It's not about talent. It's not about anything other than the fact that I feel like my job is I want to see as much of this world as I can see before I'm done. And running, actually, when I got sober, running saved my life. Yeah. And then running actually gave me a life.